Hello and welcome to the program. Coronavirus, COVID-19, is still spreading rapidly, and so too the concern about what might happen to loved ones, to jobs, to livelihoods. So how can we contain an outbreak of fear among worried citizens? This is Roundtable. And a warm welcome from me, David Foster. They say that bad news travels fast, and in times of genuine public concern, rumours move at the speed of a tweet. Hard facts. Solid science, however, can save lives, so what can be done so we can all keep calm and carry on?
As coronavirus continues to claim lives globally, concern is giving way to fear. Authorities are trying to balance containment with preventing panic. But misinformation continues to flow at a rapid rate in the form of WhatsApp messages, viral Facebook posts and videos, and tweets.
We're not just fighting an epidemic, we're fighting an infodemic. Fake news spreads faster and more easily than this virus, and is just as dangerous.
In Ukraine, riot police were called in after dozens of protesters violently attacked buses carrying evacuees from coronavirus hit China. In Australia, the UK, the US and Canada, rumours of impending lockdowns have circulated, in part causing supermarkets to become battlegrounds, leaving many without toilet paper, hand sanitizer or even soap. Mental health campaigners in the UK have said the coronavirus pandemic is causing increased stress and anxiety, particularly in people with existing mental health problems, and the World Health Organization has acknowledged that the crisis is generating stress, advising people to avoid watching and reading or listening to news that causes feelings of anxiety. So in the face of indefinite isolation, contagion, and financial uncertainty, how can our fears about coronavirus be contained?
And joining us, we have Dr. Sander van der Linden, Assistant Professor of Social Psychology at Cambridge University. We say hello to Kelly Hunstone, Chief Executive of the Social Change UK Agency, a former advisor on behavioural science to the government. And we welcome Dr. Paul Marsden, Lecturer in Consumer Psychology at the University of the Arts in London. Welcome to you all. Sandra, I'll start with you first of all, because you are a sociologist. Nobody's fear is irrational to them. So how do you say to them, no need to worry?
Well, I think it's important to recognize that what we're in is what is called a social dilemma. And actually, you've had a very nice way of phrasing it. It's a situation where what appears to be individual level rationality, doing what you think is in your own best interest, results in what we call collective irrationality. If everyone starts doing that, then on a collective scale, it no longer makes sense. And, as we've seen, people are stockpiling toilet paper, they're panic buying, and other people follow suit. This is what I call a social contagion effect. So once we see other people doing the same thing, and we see other people who are worried, that can be contagious, because basically the way that we navigate the world is by looking at what other people are doing. And then you create a bandwagon effect, and everyone's doing it, and then society can't keep up.
I get that, but Paul, how do you say to people, you shouldn't do this, you needn't do this?
I think it's often easier to ask people to do things rather than not do things. So rather than say, oh, don't touch your face, it's better to say, just keep your hands in your pockets. People are actually better at following things when they know what to do, rather than say, don't do something. So I think giving clear instructions to help people really works. So one way that we know, and we can learn a lot from retail psychology, people going shopping to feel a bit better, and how consumer behavior people use to manage their mood. And it all basically comes down to just trying to get some control back of a world that seems out of control. You go shopping and you get to browse, you get to choose. And if you can find ways to get people to take back control of their confined environment, whether it's doing DIY, whether it's baking, whether it's taking online classes. They kind of take back control through positive action rather than say, don't do this, don't panic. Give people positive instructions where they feel they have some control over their lives. They'll actually end up feeling better and stop panicking. Probably the worst thing you can do is just say, don't panic.
But some of those palliative measures just don't exist at the moment. You talked about retail therapy, you talked about going out to eat, all of those things that you calm yourself down with. You have to find something different, right, Paul?
Yeah, I think you have to do it inside. So you're in constraints. So often, retail therapy, when you go out to the stores, yeah, sure, that helps you lift your mood because you take back control of your life, or you have that perception. So, but what you can do things at home. You can build a sense of autonomy, a sense of agency at home. We're coming up to spring. Why not do a spring clean? If you don't do your spring clean at home, you'll end up feeling better because you start controlling this environment. And a world that seems horribly out of control, that is confusing, you reduce the variables in your life, and you take back control. There's online courses you can take. You can actually try to upskill yourself. I think we're moving to kind of a world which is everything. Doing everything online, and you can replicate some of your shopping, browsing. Even if you don't buy, go and check out what will be really nice to buy when the pandemic's over.
Okay, thank you very much, Paul. Kelly, I'm going to come to you. What Paul's talking about, I mentioned palliative, might calm you down a little bit, but they are simply emollients, aren't they? They are there just to calm you for that particular moment. They don't take away the big fears. And the biggest fear, I would guess, at the moment for most people is the fear of the unknown. Nobody knows what's happening, really.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, that uncertainty and the unknown is definitely what's driving a lot of the panic and fear. And I think it's very hard right now to contain that fear and anxiety. But as we discussed, I think what we can do and what we can try and do is contain or manage our response to it. Pandemic is a word that I think many people have heard for the first time. And those who have heard of it before, have some understanding, have often thought it's something that happens somewhere else or to somebody else. And so, we are seeing that fear and panic because it's suddenly become relevant to us. It's become quite immediate. British society has more or less been hit by a bus in this situation, and so the immediate response is one that is about, as we've discussed, getting back in control, and people feel like their survival is potentially threatened, and that is why we're seeing some of these behaviours.
Yeah, and it's also, isn't it, about getting the message across? And you're one of those who believes in the behavioural science approach, as I understand it, which is basically lead a horse to water rather than making it drink, Kelly. You say, look, let's give people an idea of what they should do, and then perhaps they'll do it, which is why we haven't been told that much about what we must do. We've been led to it, if you like. Does that really work?
Yeah, I think it does to a certain extent. Some of the behavioural science that's been put into practice, certainly over the last decade, has been working with what I would call smaller groups, communities, or cohorts of people. And what I think is happening here is, and not planned, is the biggest experiment really on the British population that we've ever seen in terms of using behavioural science to try and essentially get people to do what we want them to do, which started off as some small nudges or very important nudges around washing our hands, but now we're actually trying to facilitate a real massive change in people's behaviour, which is changing their very day-to-day existence, and that is a lot harder, and of course something we haven't done at scale before. So this is, in a sense, quite an unknown in terms of behavioural science as well.
Okay, Paul, I'll come to you about nudge theory in just a moment, because I think you don't agree with it that much. But again, coming to you, Sandra, what do you think we've learned about the British people?
I think what's been said is really interesting, because the way to solve these social dilemmas is actually by taking into consideration the effect we have on other people. And the initial message, including from the government, was focused on individual level behavior, washing your hands and so on. And now it's shifting to giving people reasons why they should comply because it is in the interest of other people. But that's not how it started out, because the most important things people can do, I agree, was about regaining control for people. People were out buying stuff because it's a mechanism to regain control. But now we know that we can gain control much more effectively by physical distance and things like that. There was an NHS doctor on the BBC last night pleading people to stay home because they're absolutely overrun and there's people out there risking their lives. And the best thing people can do is just to stay at home. And I think many people didn't realize at first that they could be a carrier even if you have no symptoms. And if you go out and you're fit and healthy, you could inadvertently give it to some vulnerable population that you didn't put at risk. And I think people hadn't thought about the social considerations of the pandemic.
The difficulty with the nudge theory, as proposed, I don't know, perhaps by Sandra as well as by Kelly, is that people think it's, well, just something they might have to do, rather than something they absolutely must do. And that means you're behind the curve sometimes on this, doesn't it? And no wonder people are frightened because of that.
I think people are. I think there's general people are they're frightened for their livelihoods, and so I'm looking at sort of instant, fairly recent research or done over the last 48 hours. People are worried about their financial security as well as their physical security, and ultimately there's this sort of generalized angst. They're worried about their lives. They're worried for other people. They're worried for themselves. And in that context, actually trying to sort of educate people or try and force people to do things, I think it's really tough. But what we can do is when people are inside, when we've got this kind of COVID cocooning going on, where people actually are retreating inside to their homes and living there, we can actually give people positive things to do. So for example, we're seeing that in Italy, people actually acts of kindness and connecting socially by music on balconies and things like that, by actually giving people simple tasks to do, keeping a positive mind whilst we're self-isolating, social distancing is really important. So something that's simple that anybody can do is just when you're kind of brushing your teeth, either in the morning or in the evening, just think of 3 good things that have happened to you in the last 24 hours, because you will find them, and that will reframe you. It's a kind of a positive nudge rather than a behavioral nudge. It's a mindset nudge, and just thinking of 3 good things that have happened to you. So I think if we can create these kind of positive nudges which reset your mindset, then the whole thing becomes a lot easier to deal with, and people become more open to actually doing the big behavioral changes we need around behavior.
I totally agree with that. We absolutely need to do it. The problem that we have is around sustaining some of these actions, which is why the core message that came out is about going at the right time. Because if we're asking people to sustain these massive changes to their life every single day, we can't prolong it for as long as, too long, that people are going to get bored. There may be people in completely different situations or circumstances from our own where we're lucky we can work from home. We may have good homes and good relationships that we're in, but there are a lot of people in different circumstances, and actually sustaining that for a long period of time could be a really difficult thing to do.
I mentioned earlier that I had a particular theory, and it's a little bit about how close it gets to you personally. And one of the largest groups we've seen out and about have been the 20 to 30 age group, who basically have been led to believe that if they get it, nothing very much is going to happen. I think it's going to take, unfortunately, the death or deaths of a number of young people with no underlying health conditions for this really to hit home. Do you agree with that?
Well, it has been happening. And I think people are paying attention to it. There have been a few cases where people have been surprised by this. Younger people, this is just my intuition, but younger people are complying less than older generations. And again, I think it is about doing the pro-social thing and putting that message out there. Again, I have to slightly disagree about this concept of behavioral fatigue. I think it's important. I think it's an important concept. People may get tired from staying inside, and how do we motivate people? Completely agree with Paul on the staying on the positive side of things. But it did sign a letter along with 600 other behavioral scientists in the UK that there's absolutely no consistent evidence on the notion of what the government calls behavioral fatigue or self-isolation or media fatigue. It's a real concept. People do get tired, but the evidence base is not robust. And to base a public health strategy on a concept which hasn't been well researched. There's a serious lack of randomized control experiments on behavioral fatigue in the context of pandemics like COVID-19.
Is this anything to do with your interesting theories about the bad news game and inoculation theory, Sander?
Yes, because I think in some ways it's all reactive. And I think we just ran a multi-country survey here at the University of Cambridge at the Whitten Center for Risk and Evidence. And one of the things we found is that people are not happy with the response from the government, which has been reactive and slow. Whereas the inoculation metaphor that we research and use is a preemptive strike. So it's better to prevent than cure. And so you always have to stay ahead of the game. You have to preemptively prepare people for difficult messages and for difficult measures, especially when you're transitioning from nudge to potentially forcing people to stay home. Lots of people might not understand why a measure is being enacted, why they have to comply. So it's all about preemptively informing people, something we call pre-bunking. So staying ahead of the game rather than trying to do everything retroactively, because it's so much harder to correct things when the damage has already been done. And that's one of the difficult things I think about governments, is trying to stay ahead of the game, trying to preemptively protect people, both from misinformation and fake news. That was a missed opportunity. Right now we're behind the curve trying to correct messages. Drinking bleach, doesn't cure the coronavirus. But again, the government could have had a proactive messaging strategy where they protect people from misinformation, where they preemptively instruct people what the best course of action is, and not switch halfway through and send out conflicting cues.
Okay, I know that I've read even before this became as serious as it is now that they were actually looking at having a department or a department within a department to handle fake news. Whether that's been overwhelmed is another matter, but they may be working behind the scenes. We do not know. But this is a question that I want to put to each one of you. I'll come to you first of all, Paul. I suggested at the beginning that fear in all of this was a terrible thing, but actually people with the scale of this and the seriousness of it need to be frightened, don't they?
I agree to a certain extent. I mean, there's some research, there's a paper just out today actually talking about the fact that whilst at an individual level, a lot of people, particularly younger people, might have the perception that they're low risk. There is an advantage in creating a sense of panic, which basically gets an excessive response to a perceived threat, an immediate. Because actually, if everybody who thinks that they personally have a low level of risk continues to do what they do, then we risk kind of a systemic failure in both the economy and social collapse, economic collapse. And so actually creating a sense of panic, perversely, and I'm a positive psychologist, so I'm all about trying to sort of talk people down panic. It's often not a particularly positive emotion because it is emotionally led. But in this particular case, actually instill some sense of panic may actually help. And I think, to your point, when you're saying that you think maybe some younger people needs the lesson, and we do learn by consequences, and other people falling ill because of this. I think it's going to be more about seeing the consequences about their financial insecurity, about their jobs, and most importantly for their elder loved ones, their grandparents. And so when they see one of their grandparents or their parents actually fall ill from this, they lose their job, they risk losing their home, then I think it will come home in a strong way. So I think actually if the communication is focused around targeted, creating a sense of urgency rather than panic is probably a more positive way of putting it. Okay. Urgency around it by looking at the consequences.
Kelly, you're dying to say something, but let me throw this one at you, then say whatever you want. Therefore, best to scare them witless.
Well, I do agree with that. We need to create a sense of urgency, particularly in that a group of people that aren't listening to the advice and will soon be the many control measures that the government will put in place. It goes back to making it relevant and immediate to people, because that is what makes people feel that they need to act, is if it becomes relevant and immediate to them. But for me, fear and panic can actually be life-saving. When we're in immediate danger of being, say, run over by a car, for example, our most rational response is to either freeze or to get out of the way of the car. And so some amount of anxiety can actually be quite good. In this case, fear has been a bit of a motivator. It's raised our alertness. It reminds us to wash our hands. It's told us to pay attention to the news and to watch it more regularly. And yes, I know a bit of panic buying, but even allowed us to stock up on those food and those essential items. And also, I think the fear and panic is helping us to understand that our behaviour is also impacting other people's behaviour.
Interesting. I noticed you mentioned to my producer that it might not be a bad idea to take pictures of what you have in your trolley when you are responsible shopping, rather than posting pictures of people who are nicking 8 million bog rolls all at the same time, because then you would be drawing attention to the good behaviour which people might then want to emulate.
Yes, absolutely. I think the more that we tell, so what I was talking about, how if Boris Johnson comes out and tells people not to stockpile, it's more likely to encourage that behaviour. So we want to be talking about the positive behaviours rather than the negative.
Yeah, look at me. I've only taken 1 can of beans. I've only taken this, that, and the other. Put a picture of that outline and hope that everybody doesn't think you're being too saintly for the sake of it.
Yes, over the last week, we've seen a shift in the media of highlighting more of that positive behaviour, but also that the impact that it's had, and that on the people like nurses, on the older generation, when they haven't been able to get the items they need in their baskets, and the switch there has created this emotional connection between us and them, and actually making us think about our own behaviour in a better way. And I think that's a good thing.
Sandy, you want to say something?
Well, I think these are all the kind of positive nudges that we've been talking about. And the Behavioural Insights team at the government has lots of good ideas about these kinds of positive nudges that could help people. And you could leverage the social contagion effects in the right direction here by drawing attention to responsible behavior and letting that go viral, for example. But I think it's important to distinguish between fear and worry. I think fear is not adaptive. Fear is a paralyzing emotion, whereas worry is an active emotional state that people seek to reduce by taking action. So I think people should be worried, but we shouldn't be instilling fear in people, because that tends to lead to chaos and inaction. But what is an appropriate level of worry for different age groups, for yourself and both for other people? I think that's the critical question.
Yeah, Paul, you're dying to get in.
Yeah, no, I think the points, I agree with these ones. I think what we need are positive role models in this, and so I think you see sort of Arnold Schwarzenegger going viral last week, saying, "Hey, look,
I think that's a rather unfortunate use of the word viral, isn't it? Don't you think at the moment?
Perhaps, yeah. So it's priming. Yeah. So, but actually, and Heidi Klum, Taylor Swift, all talking about the importance, and Tom Hanks going into social isolation. We have these positive role models of people doing what we want them to do, rather than saying, "Hey, don't do this, don't do that." I mean, as you imagine, when if you're driving a car, when you do the advanced driving test, to say, don't look at what you want to avoid, look at where you want to go. And I think that kind of positive focus about giving people role models, whether it be celebrities, whether it be leaders, of positive things to do, which showing the positive action, rather than sort of to go tut saying, "Oh, look, you shouldn't be doing this." I think that's going to be much more effective in the long term, because when we're in a state of uncertainty, we look to others and we follow others, and whether it is buying a bajillion toilet rolls, or whether it's actually following good behavior, we look to others. And so the more that we can actually elevate positive role models, then I think the more we will actually propagate, to use another bad analogy, positive behavior.
Let me just ask each one of you. I'll start with you, Kelly. We may run out of time, but this is very personal. Are there things that you're worried about that you are able to deal with?
Oh, good question. I think the uncertainty, mostly around how long this is going to be, is the thing that worries me the most. As a business owner myself, so I think it's the length of time that this will go on is the thing that worries me. What I'm doing about that is I'm looking to the information, the advice, and the data, and anything that's out there to kind of give us some idea. And I think being told that 12 weeks is the time that we're talking about is something that's helping me not to worry as much.
Okay, there's a danger in that, though, isn't there, Sandra? Perhaps that if you're told it's 12 weeks, it becomes 14, 16, 18, 6 months, you become even more concerned.
It could be much longer, but as I think Paul was saying, we should draw attention to the positive examples. People volunteering online, Chris Martin, Coldplay giving, free concerts at home. telling people to stay at home and not buy toilet paper, listen to some music instead. So I think there's lots of ways that we could keep each other motivated. And kind of that's what worries me, is that trying to figure out ways and using evidence-based insights to help each other through this crisis, rather than people not following health advice.
And take positives, because perhaps, Paul, I'll come to you since you're at the end of the line at the moment and we're getting near the end. Society may change for the better in a way that we might never, ever have been able to imagine, even 6 months ago.
Yeah, I think, you can make a very dark analogy that, we can look up and we can see blue skies. We can see, Venice, we can see dolphins there. We can realize that actually there's maybe, you can make the argument there's been a net benefit to human health, this pandemic, because we're stopping polluting and wrecking our environment. And we're realizing also how important social connection is. We're kind of born alone and we die alone, and we've got 2.5 billion heartbeats, so we desperately try not to be alone. And this kind of forced social distancing and self-isolation I think it's making people realize how important other humans are, and that we're in this together.
Thank you very much indeed, each one of you, for coming out of a certain amount of self-isolation to put yourself in a place where we could at least see you, if not touch you. We're well more than 2 meters away from you. I'm on my own pretty much in this studio, apart from some people in the darkness over there. I hope I never meet them. From me, David Foster, from the Roundtable team, thank you for watching. Thank you for taking part. We hope to have your company next time. Bye-bye.